as I used to say in the parish when I was a parish pastor on the Sundays in the summer when attendance would be low, I would say we're the faithful remnant, which translates as the people who didn't get invited to go camping this weekend. But here we are, and it's good to see you. We have a good, I think, meeting for you tonight. We're going to get a chance to meet, spend some time in devotion, and then meet a couple more of our interns. And then also have an opportunity to hear from Pastor Keith Pearson, who's our regional gift planner, talk about issues like congregational endowment funds, personal estate planning, how your congregation can benefit from these kinds of matters, and you as well. And so we'll get started here. Labor Day is coming, and you know that we have a worship service that we're making available to you. The entire service, or just the sermon, or just the introduction, or just the service without the sermon. You have options. I'm preaching a short sermon on labor, and since it is Labor Day weekend, and I thought it'd be good for us to reflect some more on that as we enter into this Labor Day holiday coming up. One of the most famous speeches of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was his speech before the sanitation workers just days before his assassination. And in that speech, he comments on the dignity of labor, and I wanted to share a portion of that speech with you here now. Sorry about that. I just realized I have to make sure the sound works, so I'll try that again. Let me get her going here. I'll get there, I promise. Hang on. Oh, let's see. Where is that? All right, here we go.
You are demanding that this city will respect the dignity of labor. So often we overlook the worth and the significance of those who are not in professional jobs, of those who are not in the so-called big jobs. But let me say to you tonight that whenever you are engaged in work that serves humanity and is for the building of humanity, it has dignity and it has worth. You are reminding not only Memphis, but you are reminding the nation that it is a crime for people to live in this rich nation and receive starvation wages. Somewhere I read of the freedom of assembly. Somewhere I read of the freedom of speech. Somewhere I read of the freedom of press. Somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest for rights.
At this particular moment in our history, we're gaining a new appreciation for essential workers, right? People who labor for a living in particular ways that maybe we haven't always valued as much as we should have. And I don't know about you, but I'm grateful for grocery store workers and sanitation workers and all of the people that have faithfully done their work throughout this time. And I'm grateful for the labor that you do as well. I'm mindful of the reality that all of our labor is a lot harder now because of the realities of COVID-19 and what we're dealing with. I want to share from you from this resource that I've been using from Psalm 17. I call upon you, for you will answer me, O God. Incline your ear to me, hear my words. Wondrously show your steadfast love, O Savior of those who seek refuge from their adversaries at your right hand. Guard me as the apple of the eye. Hide me in the shadow of your wings from the wicked who despoil me, my deadly enemies who surround me. So in terms of adversaries and enemies, we have some, I would name a few: boredom, anxiety, unemployment, pandemic, dissension, conflict, injustice. We're surrounded by these enemies right now, and we're especially mindful of them in this particular time. And I want you to know I'm grateful for your perseverance in the work that you're doing as congregational presidents, and whatever it is you do when you're not doing that work, the ways that you continue to work to sustain us as a people. And for those of us who are mindful of all of these different adversaries, hear this prayer once again. Guard me as the apple of your eye. Hide me in the shadow of your wings from the wicked who despoil me, my deadly enemies who surround me. Let us pray. Protecting God, we thank you for always being attentive to our voice. In the midst of the evil and wickedness that surround us, may we always turn to you first for your loving shelter. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, I'm grateful this evening that we have with us another one of our interns. You got to meet a couple at our last meeting. And we also have with us tonight Curtis Peterson, who is a student in the Collaborative Learning Program at Wartburg and serving also as a synodically authorized minister at Glendon. So Kurt, I'm going to invite you to share a little bit about yourself and the program that you're in and how that's going for you with our presidents here tonight.
Yeah, thank you. I went to college at Concordia, so that's how I ended up in the area. And I'd always kind of thought about going to seminary, but never really took it seriously. Like that was always something I'd do later. And after ending up unexpectedly working at the thrift store at the New Life Center, and at the same time being the church council president at Dilworth Lutheran Church, I started to feel that call more strongly. So I ended up applying for candidacy, and when I looked at seminaries, Wartburg's Collaborative Learning Program seemed like the best fit for me. Instead of doing the traditional 2 years of class and then a 1-year internship and then a final year of class, the Collaborative Learning Program has you working at a church the entire 4 years while having a 3/4 time course load also for 4 years. So my third year, I'll take a couple of classes from the first, second, and fourth year of seminary instead of staying with my cohort the whole time. But So I'm here working at Glendon Lutheran. Right now I'm helping plan worship and doing the sermon every other week and making sure all the live streaming and online stuff works right and getting ready for Sunday school and confirmation class to start up in a few weeks. And I'm also getting ready for classes at Wartburg to start next week, which will be looking a lot like this. We'll all be in Zoom and having, normally we'd have our first week of the semester. Next week would be prologue week down there in person, but that's going to be through Zoom too. So I'm going to have a lot of Zoom in my near future here. So the great thing about the collaborative learning program is it's a good fit for people who already are working in a church. So if any of you have someone at your church who's like a youth minister or a music director or something like that, who's thought about going to seminary but hasn't figured out a way to do that, the collaborative learning program also works with the Master of Diaconal Ministry program that Wartburg has and the Master of Arts programs that they offer. So it's not just for people who are looking to go into rostered ministry like I am. So several people in my cohort around the country are doing collaborative learning, but they're working as a education director or a family ministry director or something like that at their home church, and they're going for their diaconal ministry or their masters in arts. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Kurt. It's good to see you. And I know we have with us, so Kurt's from Wartburg, or is a student at Wartburg, and Daphne Urban is also here with us tonight, and she's a student at Luther, and she can share a little bit about the program that she's in and where she's serving. Daphne, will you go next?
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Daphne Urban. I am at Luther Seminary. I'm in a distributive learning program for or working towards ordained minister, pastor. Yeah, so the distributive learning program is a 2/3 online and 1/3 on campus program. It's typically 5 years long, and I'm in my 4th year. I'm probably going to end up being 5 years and 4 months, something like that. So I have less than 2 years left. Not a typical program by any means, but it works for me. I live in Bemidji, so 4 hours north of the Twin Cities where Luther Seminary is. And so I take most of my classes online. Many of them have a Zoom component like this. When I do go to campus, it's for an intensive class. So there's a little pre-work, and then in class for the week, in person, we have about 30 hours of class, and then there's a final assignment due a couple weeks later. So it's called an intense class for a reason. They are intense, but it's also really fun to go to campus and see people from around the country that are doing the same thing as me, because I don't know any other seminary students in Bemidji. So I do feel a little isolated here sometimes. But currently I'm doing a 2-year half-time internship and taking classes at the same time. So I'm at Calvary Lutheran Church in Bemidji, and my supervisor is Nate Bendorf, but there's also 2 other pastors there as well. It's a big congregation. I'm about half done, so I have 1 year left, and I'm set to start taking Biblical Hebrew in a couple weeks at Luther as my next course. So I'm a little nervous. Languages aren't my strong point, but I got through Greek, so how hard can Hebrew be, right? So yeah, it's really a joy being an intern. I'm learning that ministry life is not 8 to 5, it's all the time. So to really be purposeful when I schedule downtime and really take it. So, and school time and ministry time and stuff and all that, but it's really a joy. I'm really enjoying everything I'm doing, and I'm just really thankful to be in the program. I also am married and have 3 little ones at home who are set to start school a couple weeks before me. They're 7, 9, and 11, so we're gearing up for school for them as well in all sorts of new ways.
Well, thank you, Daphne. And if you can figure out at this point in your formation as a pastoral leader how to set those boundaries and take that quality time that you need for your own renewal, that'll be fantastic. So keep working at that. I commend that to you. And also, you know, one of the reasons why I wanted to have our interns come and introduce themselves was for a couple of reasons. You as leaders in your congregations, I encourage you to be mindful of potential leaders, whether that's young people or people maybe for whom it might be a second career, who you've maybe thought could possibly serve in our church as a rostered minister, as a pastor or a deacon. And don't hesitate to talk to them, to your pastor or deacon, to me, and John Olson on our staff, who works, who's our minister for vocations. We want to know about people that might be potential leaders, and we want them to understand that there's a lot of different ways for this to happen. So that's one reason. I wanted you to be aware of that, but also, as you can see, both Daphne and Kurt are actually also providing important ministry in the congregations where they're serving. So the first most important part of an internship, of course, is the formation of that leader as a future leader in the church. But also, we're mindful of just the plain reality that they also bring gifts and needed services to congregations. And that's getting more and more true now. And so I'm grateful for you, Daphne, and you, Kurt. You're welcome to hang in there through the meeting. You're also welcome to go if you got other stuff happening tonight. But we're not going to talk about you or anything after you sign off. So we will not do that. But it's great to see you. Thanks again. So one of the things I love about our church is that we're in this together. Bishop Eaton likes to say we're church together. One of the ways that manifests itself is in our synod. What we're doing right here now, what we've been doing since March, right, is this way of gathering. I think this is the lowest number we've had, 29, and I know we've had almost more than 90 presidents on a call at one time. And so this is just one small way that we're church together. Another way is, I think, well evidenced here tonight with the presence of Pastor Keith Pearson. Pastor Keith is our regional gift planner, working with the ELCA Foundation, here to serve congregations and to serve you. And he's an important asset in our synod and in the Southwestern Minnesota Synod, and an important partner in this work we do together. And so I want to turn it over to Pastor Keith, and he'll have a presentation for us.
All right, so first things first, can you hear me? Yeah, okay, that's good.
Yep.
So next thing will be whether or not I can share my screen with you. And if I can get the right one selected. There we go. Now you should see a PowerPoint screen up there. Does that look right? Yes, okay. We're halfway home then. All right. So thanks, Bishop Bill, for introduction and that lead in. There we go. All right. So yes, as I said, I'm with the ELCA Foundation, and most of you probably don't even know what that is. So that's where my first step off is. The ELCA Foundation it's a separately incorporated ministry of the ELCA, just like Portico, the Mission Investment Fund, Lutheran Men in Mission, that sort of thing. We're not, we're our separate, our own entity. We are stewards of long-term investments for the congregations and other ministries of the ELCA. That is kind of long game endowments and trusts and that sort of thing. I like to compare it against the Mission Investment Fund because they're sort of the bookends with us. Mission Investment Fund is more like a savings and loan. I like to say that they're money on hold, and the foundation is your money at work. If you have a certain amount of money that you just need to save for a bit, a project coming up and you're expecting that you'll have to spend most or all of it within a few months or maybe 2 or 3 years, Mission Investment is where you'd want it to be. But if you have funds that you want to keep for the long term and just use the interest or the growth from that fund, then it's the foundation that you'd want to talk to. Our goal is to fund current and future ministry by generating stable quarterly distributions and preserving the purchasing power of those contributions. We currently have about $771 million in net assets under management, serving the ministry needs of some 928 congregations, 54 synods, 150 and other ministry, other ministry partners like camps, Bible camps, campus ministries, and so on. The foundation is also a series of regional gift planners like myself. I think there's 23 of us embedded across the country, and we are the resource for you, for the congregations and for individuals. For congregations, as Bishop Tesh told you, we help with strategies and policies and practices for endowment funds and for receiving planned gifts and other non-traditional, non-cash giving. We also work with individuals in your congregation to help them with the tools to make generous contributions through their estate plans and special non-cash gifts. And this last part, I think people like the most. We are a free service. We do not cost you anything. We don't sell anything. We don't make any commissions or anything like that. We are purely a service of the church, by the church, for the church. We are free to you in part because of a partnership with your synod. As for me, myself, I am a pastor. I served the last 16 years in parish ministry in Southwest Minnesota, served 2 different congregations in that time, one small, one large, one where I was the only staff member and the other where I was part of a large staff team. I also served for 8 years on the board of directors with Green Lake Lutheran Ministries, which is a Bible camp, or a series of Bible camps down in Southwest, 2 in Southwest and 1 in Northeast Minnesota. I served 3 years on the Newland and Spicer Education Foundation, where we're giving grants to students and teachers for things that were sort of over and above the budget of the school. And I am one of those second career pastors yet. I didn't come to this until I was quite on in my years. I had 20 years in business before going into ministry. I worked for companies like 3M, the electric utility industry, a couple of advertising and PR agencies, including one of my own. And my real claim to fame, my very last job before I entered seminary, I worked for the state of Minnesota Office of Technology. I was the director of communications, and one of our biggest projects was Y2K. Hard to believe that that was already 20 years ago, 20 plus years ago, when we were all anxiously sitting around New Year's Eve wondering if the lights were going to go out and the society was going to go into nothing and chaos the next day, but fortunately it did not. I did my Master of Divinity degree, my theology degree at Luther and Seminary in St. Paul. I have a master's degree in business from the University of St. Thomas, also in St. Paul, and my bachelor's degree from the University of Minnesota. I stepped into this position back in November, and it feels like a lot of endings, beginnings, but also the future of the church. My very last act as a parish pastor was to preside over the wedding of my only daughter. So as my one part of my career concluded, I felt like a lot of new things were starting. So not only my new job, but also this new life that I was looking forward to for my daughter and what that would mean. And all of this, it really just kind of winds up to be, I have so much invested in the church and what the future of the church looks like. I'm concerned for my daughter and her children, what will be my grandchildren, and what the church will look like for them. So that's really what I'm up to these days. But of course, to borrow from one of the world's famous philosophers, Yogi Berra, the future ain't what it used to be. The picture that you see there is a 1959 Ford Levacar. It's from a magazine called Popular Mechanics, which was one of my inspirational readings as a child. There was all these wonderful things that were or could be, and this was one of those that really captured my imagination. But here it is, 2020, some 60 plus years later, and well, I'm still waiting for my flying car. So my point is, things change, but despite our best hopes and expectations, things may not turn out exactly as we thought. And that's kind of the thing with the church too. Just think back to the 70s, 80s, economically, inflation ruled and cash was king, right? You could put money in a simple savings account. Even your checking account started bearing interest. And there were money markets and all kinds of things. You could put cash away, put cash aside, and you get a pretty good return for it. Today, it's a different story. Borrowing money is cheap. everybody has access to a wide variety of investment vehicles. And keeping money in a checking or even a savings or CD seems foolish. The picture that you see there is my current house. We bought this about 5 years ago. Beautiful little Victorian home. And we thought we were just getting away with bank robbery practically at the low interest rates they were giving us. And they were historic lows at that time. And we thought they would never last. But here, some 5 years later, the interest rates are actually even a little bit lower than what we borrowed for at that time. So all this is just to say that, it's not the 70s anymore. All of this economic change has contributed to a fundamental shift in where people keep their wealth. And the problem is we, the church, haven't changed how we share with them or how we invite them to share their wealth for the good of God's kingdom. So where is today's wealth? Since all of these changes, can you imagine cash? The average person in the U.S., the average household in the U.S. keeps less than 2% of their total wealth in cash. That leaves the balance, some 98%, in assets. What do I mean by assets? That'd be things like life insurance policies, your home, a business, retirement funds, equipment, large equipment, farmland, other real estate, and stocks and bonds. So remember, people have less than 2% of cash, their wealth in cash. How much of that do you suppose the church receives? Bishop Dash?
A little over 2%.
Exactly. So it comes to the bottom line. Cash is not king for fundraising. This is the title of a bit of research that was done by Texas Tech University. They did a study of over 1 million nonprofit organizations based on IRS Form 990 filings. They covered the period from 2010 to 2015. They found organizations that reported receiving cash donations only over that 5-year period grew by about 11%, which is just slightly above the collective inflation for the time. Then they looked at organizations that reported receiving cash and non-cash gifts. Turns out they grew by 41%. And organizations that reported receiving any kind of intangible personal property gifts, primarily this was securities, actually increased. They received 106% more than they had 5 years earlier. Any of your churches keeping that kind of pace? And just so you're not, this last line kind of caught me. They said relatively smaller or insignificant changes came from contributions from household goods, clothing, food, books, and collectibles. So in other words, garage sale, bake sale, book sale is not going to give you this kind of result. So how many of these gifts has your congregation received in the last year, 5 years, 10 years? If I think about it over just my 16 years in ministry, I could only come up with 4 instances that I could think of where somebody gave us stocks or deeded some property or something like that. It was a pretty rare thing, and I think that's kind of typical through most of the churches. So why is that? Why don't more people give from their assets? The number one reason, we just don't ask. We never ask these sort of things. And even if we do, they're worried about what's going to happen to their gift if they do. Particularly, this is true with estate gifts, large gifts, bequests at the end of life. The experience that a lot of people seem to have with giving these large inheritance sort of gifts to the church is either it's spent within a week and probably on something not terribly wise, or it sits for decades. And each of the 2 congregations I served had one of these examples. The first congregation that I served, they had this gift, a beautiful gift that was given by a nice woman who had been part of the congregation her whole life. She was single her whole life. She was a teacher. And when she passed away, nobody knew it, but she had put the church in their will. And they received this beautiful bequest. But she didn't give them any kind of direction for it. And they weren't really prepared to receive it. So what did they do? They put it in a CD. They set it aside and basically left it there. The other congregation had the opposite end. there was this happened before I began serving there, but there was a story that a lot of people told about a bequest that had come in, a six-figure bequest that had come in after somebody had passed away, and it just disappeared. Nobody really knew how it used, what it was used for. There was a lot of speculation about it and some distrust around that. But so these are the two classic examples of why people may not include us in the will. So why the church is not the charity of choice for planned gifts and other asset-based gifts. Yeah, people may have had this negative experience, either using or not using the planned gifts. We don't provide clarity over how we're going to use them. We don't give much of a vision or a purpose for those planned gifts, or just plain don't ask. So as you can imagine, the problem this is leading us towards, the church is missing something really big, something really vital. We have people that are willing to give, and they give out of their income, but they rarely give to us out of their assets. So how can we change that? This is probably a good point to pause, and I'll invite your questions. I'll stop sharing my
Feel free
screen.
to use the chat feature as well.
Yeah.
If you have questions.
Or does anybody have a story of receiving these kind of gifts? I said, Del Rey, you're speaking, but I can't hear you. You have to unmute yourself.
Okay.
There we go.
So a number of years ago, in about 30 years, our church received within a 5-year period, 2 gifts, just as you're speaking. One was, just under $300,000. And we had a great pastor here that fully understood what was going on. And he sat with the people and we laid out a pretty concise way to apply this. But the problem at the end of the day was that it was to further ministry of our area, which, I think from our standpoint, we could use your coaching, just in a little bit of listening to you right now. The basic thing that we've got right now, we use this here in the ministry locally and across the pond.
Mm-hmm.
Our second one, same thing. It was not nearly as much, but it was 6 figures, and it was basically the perpetual care of their grave sites. But I took a snapshot or a picture of your opening frame, if you don't mind. I'd like to share that with my counselor,
Sure.
as my treasurer, because I'm a barterer. I'm not kidding you. The idea of people being able to embrace this type of giving, in my mind, that would be perfect. A person would need coaching, tax coaching.
Sure.
So that's our story up here in northern Minnesota. The people are the same. Like I say, it was you speak very loudly to what we've experienced. So thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other examples? I'm working with one congregation right now that has received such a bequest. Very nice gift, and they weren't expecting it, and they hadn't asked for it. But suddenly they have, again, a kind of mid 6 figures gift to a relatively small congregation. And one of the quandaries that puts them in immediately is, what do we do with it? And how do people react to it? Everybody, of course, has an idea where it maybe should be spent. And as you can imagine, good Lutherans as we are, wherever 2 or 3 are gathered, you've got 4 or 5 opinions. So with no structure in place and no way to guide it, they're left with those kind of ongoing quandaries. And on top of that, then people look at a fat bank balance and they say, well, we don't need to give them because the church has got plenty of money right now. And that could never be further from the truth either. the money eventually will be gone. It'll be used, and if we don't continue those practices of good stewardship, it's not just the church's budget that suffers, but it's the person's individual spirituality that suffers too. We have a need to give. We have a need to be engaged and involved. Anybody else have a? Yeah.
I could share a story, Keith.
Sure.
I worked with a congregation. It was actually, I later worked with this congregation in synodical ministry down in South Dakota, but it was actually a congregation that I served in my first call almost 30 years prior. And over those 30 years, they were an open country church made out of found fieldstone, beautiful congregation. The town had literally closed. There was just a little marker there signifying that a town had once been there. And so they realized they were coming to the end of their life as a congregation. But the problem I say was that they had almost $1 million in assets. And they recognized that they could continue indefinitely with anywhere from 8 to 15 people that might show up on a Sunday. But in their I was so proud of them, because as they discerned that in their wisdom, they realized not only were they not serving anyone else, but they weren't even serving each other effectively because they had gotten so small. And so they spent a year giving away $1 million. And they helped start a new congregation. They set up some scholarship funds. They had some local ministries they cared about. And then they, now the church itself is an institute for rural life that gets used about 4 times a year. So.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty cool.
Yeah.
But I'd have a question for Bishop Cash. What did the 8 to 15 people do, and then the 40 people that didn't show up on Sundays? What was the service to them? That, I'm gonna guess that that's where we're at here as far as the small congregations. Is that those of us that are hanging on? What happened to those people?
Well, part of that work for that year,
I would assume, right?
Yeah, we can sure talk some more about that sometime, Del Rey. Be happy to. But short answer is, a big part of what happened during that year was helping people to find a church home. And there were several options not that far away. A couple of other open country congregations and a church in a nearby larger town. By nearby, I mean like 7 miles away. So it was a lot of, it was a difficult process, but once they made the decision, they were at peace with it. And I think they ended up actually having a lot of fun being able to bless other ministries as they brought their ministry to a close.
Well, I can even tell you a story on one of the 2 congregations that I alluded to earlier too. The one that had the small, it was a nice bequest. Not huge. It wasn't even 6 figures. I think it was maybe $50,000. And as I said, it was a teacher. She'd been a teacher all her life. She retired, passed away, and left this $50,000 to the church. And the church didn't quite know what to do with it. They weren't prepared to receive it. They weren't prepared with a plan as to what to do with it. So when I first arrived on the scene, that was one of the things I noticed. They had just a CD sitting aside, earning just pitiful money, and they weren't using it for anything. So I started asking questions about it. What is it, and where did it come from, and what do you do with it? Well, they told me the story where it came from, but then I learned that they weren't doing anything with it. Well, so why not? So, well, we're trying to protect it, or we don't want to lose it. Well, that's not why she gave it. She gave it to you to be used. So it took a while, and we had some conversations around that before we finally decided, okay, she didn't put any restrictions on it, so we could do whatever we wanted to, but we want to do something that would kind of honor her memory. So we should probably do something for kids. What can we do for kids? Well, at the same time, we'd kind of had lost connection with the local Bible camp. And Bible camp was really important to me growing up, and it was important in my faith journey. So I said, well, how about, we use it for some scholarships, encourage kids to go to Bible camp. Well, that sounds like a good idea. So, okay, we'll do that. And that kind of took off. And we were starting to get kids going to Bible camp that had never gone to camp before. And then that grew, and we were able to give, half scholarships to anybody that wanted to go. And we were getting more and more kids going. And then pretty soon the men's group stepped up and said, you know what, we'll pay the other half for any boys that want to go. And then the women's group stepped up and said, we'll do the other half for any girls that want to go. And pretty soon we're giving full scholarships to any kid that wants to go to Bible camp. And we got families starting to come to this little church that was kind of struggling before. And suddenly we are the family church, and there are kids all over the place. And it was just this glorious thing that happened because of this little bequest. And we put it to work in doing things in God's kingdom. And I think it absolutely honored the woman who had left it to us, and it's still doing that to this day. So that's the kind of thing that you want this to turn into. It can be a really inspirational thing, and it can be a thing that grows and can be added to. These one-time large bequests, maybe they don't come real often, but once you begin the momentum towards that, then it builds and it grows, especially if you can latch on to, something that really speaks to the heart of your congregation. I'm gonna go back to sharing my screen again. I got a little bit more to show you here. So let's go there. And on from there, a little more detail for you. Oops. All right. There we go. Okay, so we're really good at these three boxes. We're good about asking people to volunteer, right? And we're good about asking people to give out of their income, out of their cash flow, out of their cash savings on hands. We're good about asking people to share their expertise. We got people that know about food and cooking. We ask them to help with our hospitality and our meals and things like that. We know people that are good at building trades and things like that, so we ask them to help out with the needs of the building. We got people that are good with numbers. We ask them to be part of our finance committees and things like that. We're really good about those things, but there's a big chunk missing. If we're really including the whole person, if we're really encouraging them to give their whole life to Christ, then this asset-based giving needs to be part of the conversation, part of our encouragement with them as well. So to do that, we need a little clarity and purpose behind it. We need to help. If we're going to promote asset-based giving, we want people to be comfortable with and confident that we're going to use it wisely, and use it intentionally. Not as church goes, we change over leadership every 2-3 years, and if we don't have a good plan in place, then we're having to retool and re-educate all along the way. So just starting with something as simple as good gift policy, gift acceptance policy, and bylaws that will guide this is the first step. Then creating this idea of an endowment fund and giving it some purpose, some vision. What does that mean for your particular church, your particular congregation? What is in its DNA that this is going to be the right thing for? And then we start talking, then now that we have that clarity in place, we have a purpose in mind, now we can begin asking. We can begin asking for those gifts, those planned gifts, and those gifts will start coming in. Probably should have mentioned this a little bit earlier, but this was a great conversation that I had with one of the congregations that I mentioned earlier. They have this bequest and now they don't know what to do with it. And so one of the gentlemen on the committee that I'm working with said, it's kind of the $100 bill syndrome. We get a big bequest in. It's like I've got a $100 bill in my pocket. I will never spend that $100 bill. But the second I break it down into 20s and 10s and 5s, before you know it, it is gone. And I'm afraid this is the same thing that's going to happen with this big bequest that we've got. We start nickel and diming it, spending a little bit here, a little bit there. It's just going to be gone, poof, and we'll wonder what happened to it. So we don't want that to happen. We want something meaningful to happen to us. This was a person's lifetime accumulation, whether it was their house, their farm, a big savings, or a life insurance policy, what have you. This was big. This was important. It was probably the biggest single gift that person ever gave. So we want to honor that too. So again, bylaws, gift policy, that gives us that clarity. This really comes down to about 3 meetings that I would have with your folks there. We start out with a discovery meeting, pastor, the council, a particular group that's interested in this. We'll sit down, we'll talk about this, what it takes, maybe what you have in place already. Maybe if it's a blank slate, I can help you with some basic language to help put these policies and bylaws in place. Then we work towards what that will be, getting those approved, and then moving it on to its next step of creating that endowment committee. All along the way, I would also be meeting with individuals, starting with your leadership, we call discovery meetings. We want you to understand this process so it helps to have people that break the ice first. So whoever I'm starting the conversation with, if it's the pastor, if it's the council, if it's a special committee, those are the first people that I probably want to talk to and help them walk through this process. And somewhere along the line there, we want to identify at least one advocate, one person who's going to be willing to stand up at the end of the day when I arrive on the scene and start getting ready to talk to your congregation. I need somebody from the home team, from the hometown, to be able to stand up and say, you know, this guy's a good guy. I went through this process with him, and I think it's a great idea, and we did it. So I would encourage you to do it too. That's the thing that really then begins the ball rolling. Once you've had one of those gifts, maybe you're a congregation that's lucky and you already have a bequest that you can talk to from the beginning. Maybe you're just hoping that we can begin such a thing. But it starts with just a couple of simple meetings with people that are interested. Get a few people who are willing to go through the process. And I tell you what, it's even nice in that you may not have to put out a single dollar to start with. The most common planned gift is a bequest. So when you come to the end of your life and you've had everything you've needed, everything has been taken care of, and there's still something left over, it's that leftover that you didn't need. That becomes the gift. So it's a very easy thing to do a planned gift without even impacting your cash flow, your way of living, anything like that, right from the very beginning. Advocacy. We need somebody, several somebodies ideally, but somebody from the whole hometown, the local church that's gone through this that will speak favorably about it. You know what it's like. The first person to do something, that's the hardest one. But once you have somebody that's done it, now it's not a strange thing anymore. Now it's not a foreign thing. Now it's not a theoretical thing. Now it's the thing that my neighbor who I sit next to in the pew at church every Sunday did already. And they're kind of like me, so yeah, I can probably do that, or at least listen to it and think about it. And before you know it, you've got the ball rolling. The things that are important, the keys to success, discovery meetings with church leadership. So those very first ones, say, okay, do you have the church in your will? Have you named the church as a beneficiary in your life insurance? Maybe you should think about one of these tools. There are life estate tools where you could actually draw an income, but give the gift now and draw an income from it as long as you live. And at the end of your life, there should be a balance left, and that becomes the gift to the church. And for that matter, it can be your church and several other things too. Identify an advocate in the congregation, provide leadership commitment to you. Leadership's got to be behind this or it will not work. And then some publicity around it. I write articles that you can use in your newsletter. I would come and speak. We could do Zoom meetings like these. I've done several of those with congregations already. And then once the ball is rolling, then you celebrate. You know, it'd be really nice if you created a legacy group or committee or something like that, so you can start chalking up the results. You know, we've got Bill and Helen Anderson that joined the Legacy Club. They've got us in their will, or they've got us on their life insurance or something like that. And the next person and the next person and the next, and you celebrate each one of those. What will this look like? It'll look like cash gifts to the endowment, cash now maybe, distributions from IRA, a lot of required minimum distributions, those that used to be 70.5, now it's pushed up to 72. But every year, a lot of people have more than they need saved away, and the government says you got to start taking it out sooner or later. And a nice way to do that or satisfy that is taking one of those required minimum distributions and turning that into your gift to the church. Those are great ways to do these things. Just planting seeds, increasing awareness about what can give and how these things actually work. There's a bunch of research done around this too, but it says most people that give a bequest learned about it first from the charity that asked for it. So most people aren't even thinking this way. They're not even imagining that this is a possibility or that this would be helpful to the church. So it's important that we increase awareness of that, just this possibility. You begin to see the church as a partner in their estate, their final testament. That builds confidence and caring for their family, gives them joy in supporting what they care about. Another funny thing that happens along the way too, and I hear this from congregations from time to time, of course I hear this anytime we do anything special, whether it's a capital campaign or we're going to send the kids to the Nash Youth Gathering, well, it's going to take away from regular giving. We're always afraid it's going to take away from the annual fund. Well, you know what? There's a funny thing that happens with planned gifts. People who make a planned gift, even if it's just putting you in the life insurance policy or the will, once they've done that, their level of commitment to the church deepens and their annual giving actually increases. And some research wants to say that it'll actually double or triple their annual giving, or they tend to give 2 to 3 times as much as people that have not made that kind of commitment. So we want to let the future of the church be our legacy. These last few images are some of my family, my legacy. The one on the far left is my maternal grandfather. He was the only one of all my grandparents that was still alive when I was born. And the little guy in the red hat in his arms, that's me. I know very little about my grandparents from my personal experience. He was the last one and he passed away that same year. But I know a lot about them by what they passed along. Their values, the things that were important to them, the things that they did, the way that they celebrated life and their faith. These were things that are passed on to me, even though I didn't know them directly. In the bottom right, that's my dad. He passed away a few years ago too, so what he gives today isn't a lively gift. It's not I can't call him up and talk to him, but he continues to give gifts through the legacy of the things that he's taught me and passed on to me. In his arms is my baby girl when she was first born. Now in the upper right corner, that's the wedding picture from just back in November. We have this deep, lasting legacy. There are things about our family that are unique to us, but there are things about our family that a lot of you would share as well. And one of those things is our faith. I come from this long legacy of Christian faith, deep, deep part of who we are in our homes. And that's part of what I want to pass along. And that's what this kind of legacy giving does. This is one more way to pass along the faith, to say one more time to your children, to your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, this is important. I want you to pay attention to this. Some years ago, I read this article about this gentleman who'd been to the reading of the will for his recently deceased grandmother. And you walk in usually expecting the usual, kind of blah, 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 sound, mind, and body, and here's what I got and who gets it, right? Very drab, very legalistic, he was surprised though by what he heard. When the attorney began reading her last will and testament, it began with a faith statement. She talked about how her faith had been important to her from her childhood onward, how it had strengthened her in hard times, and how it had been part of the celebration in good times. She even put in some caveats about, if in the last days of my life I start to falter, don't worry. My faith is unshakable. My faith has been the thing that is the bedrock. It was this beautiful, beautiful statement of faith, and he remembered that more than anything else that followed in the will. That's what I hope I can help bring to you and to the members of your congregation to make such a statement, to make a statement of faith about what is important to them, about how they want to pass this along to their children and their grandchildren. That's really what this is about. To be able to take the things that are the things that you've built on your whole life, and to make that, or at least a part of that, something that passes along your faith. Okay, again, I'll turn it back to you for questions or.
Thank you, Pastor Keith. And I hope that you will not hesitate to reach out to Keith. I think I know from my personal experience that working with a gift planner in the ELCA is a huge benefit, both personally and for your congregation. The last congregation that I served was a brand new congregation. And so I was there from year 0 to year 15 of that congregation's life. And we began to develop some planned giving and through an endowment. And of course, those gifts didn't come to fruition until after I left. Now that congregation is coming up on their 30th year. And they, with some major endowment gifts that they received, they now have a ministry that each year distributes over 1 million pounds of food across the city called Bread Break. And it's become a major way in which young people are attracted to the ministry because of its the church's commitment to feed the hungry. And that's just, it took 25 years for that, for some gifts to come and then for them to bear fruit. But it's been, well, what a gift they have been. So I hope that you will reach out and find ways to work with Keith. And we have his contact information here. It's also on our website. So any questions before we move on to announcements?
Well, once again, I don't have much for questions. I was gonna convey to the group that's here, and it's too bad it's such a small group. Keith, it was a wonderful expose. Greatly appreciate it. I don't know how many rural churches you've got, Bill, but what happened to our little church? We had a family that sold a piece of land, a considerable piece of land, and the complete sale went directly to the church, including the interest. It's just that type of stuff. I greatly appreciate this. This meeting is probably great and timely for me, but it's things for the other presidents sitting here. Consider our church. I'm guessing our median age in our church is 70. So as you can tell, like I say, I can't say anything more than I so appreciate this meeting, and
Yep.
The people within the meeting, creativity, my opinion will become very, very beneficial. So thank you again, Pastor Keith. I greatly appreciate this. So thank you.
Yeah, you're very
Well,
welcome.
and it's thank you, Delray.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's, I encourage you too that the people that have, or the congregations that have received these gifts, almost invariably the word is, we never would have guessed it.
Yep.
We never saw it. It came from people you never would have expected. People have great ability to give, and they have a great desire to give. We just haven't lit up their imagination much. So this is a big chunk of what I need to do is help you ignite people's imaginations.
Yeah. And, in our rural areas, when I remember where land values were when I came into the ministry in the 80s, they're in a little different place now. And people who went into farming thinking they might have a certain amount to retire with, if they sell their property, they're going to have more than they thought when they started.
Yeah.
And a lot of that wealth, if we're not in there inviting people to share that wealth in their communities that they care about, it's going to go to Minneapolis and to Denver and to the places where their children have moved. And so it's essential for our communities and for the things that people care about, that we're in the room talking with people about where those final gifts will go. Chris, what announcements do we have?
Yeah, I have a couple of announcements. We have that worship service that Bishop Bill spoke to at the beginning, and those links will be available in this Wednesday's Northern Lights in audio and video links, all downloadable or on YouTube. Bishop Bill has a manuscript this time, so if your congregation is the type that sends out the sermons, that will be available as also with an order of service. Also, I'm going to share my screen with you quickly because we're short on time. There is a service that will be it for September 20th. Lutherans Restoring Creation, a creation-focused worship service with Bishop Elizabeth Eaton, Reverend Dr. Barbara Rossing, Reverend Lenny Duncan, Rebecca Brusoff. Music will be provided by Marty Haugen. I'll have the link to this in the Northern Lights this week, and it's a free service for your congregation to use. So there'll be a bulletin and downloadable files for September 20th. So in September, we are giving you 2 Sundays off, your worship committee if you want. Also, this meeting that we've been doing every other week can kind of get confusing, especially around holidays. So starting after Labor Day, so next week, we're going to meet the 2nd and 4th Mondays of the month. So always going to be the 2nd and 4th, so not every other, but you can mark in your calendars the 2nd and 4th Mondays. We will have this meeting. I'll continue to send out those emails I send because if something comes up that's time sensitive that you need to know about, we'll have a short meeting. I'll let you know about that. And we have 2 grants offered. We have a community resiliency grant for technology needs for COVID and for faith formation needs around COVID time. So if you need special things for confirmation or Sunday school, there's a grant for that. Then there's a grant for church leaders for respite, and that's up to $200. So those grants links are in the Northern Lights and on our website. I think that's my big announcements, Bishop Bill.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, I hope you will fill out applications for grants up to $500 for technology needs related to faith formation and or any kind of digital delivery of ministry services. And then also we're making to professional leaders in the church, rostered ministers, other church professionals, up to $200 in respite grants, which they can use for to go out somewhere where it's safe to do so, or a weekend getaway at a cabin or one of our camps. So thank you for your ministry once again, for your important work in our church. Thank you, Pastor Keith. And I see Pastor Carl is here faithfully. Will you pray us out?
Let us pray. Good and gracious God, you are a God of abundance. You bless us more than we can even imagine, both in all kinds of time and talent and resources, treasures. Sometimes when we live in fear or uncertainty, we want to cling tight to what we have, forgetting that you are continually blessing us. Help us to open our hands, our hearts, our eyes to the possibilities of your ministry all around us. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. God's peace, everyone. Have a good night.